Airline staff harass black woman. 6 minutes later, she cancels their biggest contract. Imagine walking into a luxurious airport lounge, expecting comfort and respect, only to be met with stares, whispers, and humiliation. A black woman, poised and successful, finds herself the target of unwarranted judgment from the very staff meant to serve her. What they didn't know. In just 6 minutes, she would turn their world upside down. How did it all unfold? Stay tuned. This story is one you won't forget. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy heartwarming stories of courage and justice, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support means the world and helps us reach even more people with these powerful stories. Now, let's jump right in. The hum of the airport lounge was like a quiet storm, an undercurrent of murmured conversations, the clink of glassware, and the faint buzz of announcements from distant speakers. Jasmine Carter stepped through the sleek glass doors, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. Her tailored navy suit hugged her figure elegantly, exuding confidence and professionalism. She adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase and surveyed the room with calm eyes. The air was crisp, and the lighting felt deliberately extravagant, casting a soft glow on the silver accents scattered throughout the lounge. Yet, amidst this engineered luxury, Jasmine felt the subtle weight of unwelcome eyes. She was used to this. A young man in a pressed uniform approached her with a clipboard in hand. He offered her a polite smile, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of hesitation. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "May I see your boarding pass and membership card?" Jasmine reached into her briefcase and produced the documents with a practiced grace. "Here you go," she said evenly, offering him a warm smile. The young man's smile faltered as he glanced at the card, his brow furrowing slightly. One moment, please." He disappeared behind the counter, leaving Jasmine standing in the middle of the lounge, her presence now a subject of quiet whispers. She didn't need to hear the words to know what was being said. A woman in a red blazer emerged from behind the counter moments later. Her name tag read, Heather. With her perfectly coiffed hair and sharp, critical gaze, she had the air of someone who relished authority, no matter how small. "Miss Carter, is it?" Heather asked, her voice dripping with condescension. She held up Jasmine's membership card as though it were a counterfeit bill. "Are you aware this is a priority lounge?" Jasmine's smile didn't waver, though her grip on the briefcase tightened. "Yes, I am. I've been a priority member for over 5 years." Heather's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced at the card again, then at Jasmine, her eyes narrowing. "I'm afraid I'll need further verification. We've had issues with unauthorized use of these cards recently." The insinuation was clear. "Unauthorized use?" Jasmine repeated, her voice steady but firm. She took a step closer, her presence commanding despite the polite veneer. "If you're suggesting this card doesn't belong to me, I assure you it does." Heather didn't flinch. Instead, she smirked, a subtle but deliberate act. "I'll just need to run it through our system. Procedure, you understand." Jasmine's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Of course. Take your time." Heather disappeared again, leaving Jasmine standing under the weight of judgmental glances. She could feel the unspoken questions hanging in the air. What's she doing here? How could she afford this? A couple seated nearby exchanged whispers, their eyes darting toward her and then away. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, refusing to let the murmurs chip away at her composure. Minutes passed. Heather returned, her expression smug. "Well, Miss Carter," she began, drawing out the words, "it appears everything checks out. However, I must remind you that priority members are expected to adhere to a certain standard of decorum while in the lounge." Jasmine's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. And what standard would that be? Heather tilted her head, her smile widening. "Let's just say we expect a level of refinement that reflects the exclusivity of this space." The message was clear, the insult wrapped in a veneer of professionalism. Jasmine didn't take the bait. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate breath and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for the clarification," she said coolly. Heather blinked, as though surprised by the lack of anger. She opened her mouth to say something else, but Jasmine had already turned away, making her way to a seat near the corner of the lounge. She set her briefcase down and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she considered her options. This wasn't the first time she'd faced such treatment, but it was one of the more blatant instances. A quiet resolve settled over her. She tapped on a contact and brought the phone to her ear. "This is Jasmine Carter," she said softly, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "We need to talk about the contract with Skyline Air. There's been an incident." Heather's laughter echoed faintly from the counter, unaware of the storm brewing just 6 minutes away. The lounge's polished hum continued around Jasmine as she ended the call, her hand lingering on her phone for a moment longer than necessary. The familiar pang of indignation rippled through her, but she held it tightly in check, letting her calm exterior remain unbroken. She leaned back in her seat, the supple leather offering little comfort as she silently observed the scene around her. Heather and the other staff had returned to their tasks, their movements laced with a quiet arrogance. Heather's laughter spilled into the air again, sharp and pointed, as though daring Jasmine to react. The other staff, emboldened by Heather's presence, shared quick, conspiratorial glances that spoke louder than words. Jasmine caught the tail end of a remark from one of them, a younger man with a clipped accent who muttered, "She probably saved for months just to walk in here." The others chuckled, their mirth just audible enough to reach her. "Do they really think this is okay?" Jasmine wondered, her fingers brushing the sleek material of her briefcase. The weight of her company's success rested in that briefcase. Proposals, contracts, partnerships that had taken years of hard work and resilience to forge. She thought of the hours spent proving herself in boardrooms filled with dismissive stares, of the silent battles fought and won. This moment was just another test, one she wouldn't fail. Her phone buzzed lightly against the table, interrupting her thoughts. The name on the screen read Anderson Quinn, her company's chief operating officer. Jasmine swiped to answer, her voice steady. "Jasmine," Anderson's deep, authoritative voice filled the line. "I got your message. What's going on?" She glanced toward the counter where Heather now stood, leaning casually against it with a self-satisfied air. "There's been an issue with Skyline Air," Jasmine began, her voice calm but laced with a simmering intensity. "Their staff seems to believe it's acceptable to demean their customers based on appearances." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Appearances?" Anderson asked, his tone sharp with understanding. "Yes." Jasmine's gaze remained fixed on Heather as she spoke. "I was accused of misusing my membership card. Then I was subjected to veiled insults about my place in this lounge, all of it thinly disguised as protocol." Anderson let out a low, disapproving sigh. "Unacceptable," he said firmly. "Do you want me to initiate the process?" "Not yet." Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on the edge of the table. Her voice dropped, quiet but deliberate. "I want them to feel the full weight of what they've done, Anderson, not just a slap on the wrist." Anderson's chuckle was dark and approving. "Understood. I'll be ready when you are." Jasmine ended the call and placed her phone face down on the table. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to let the fire in her chest settle into a steady burn. The path forward was clear now, and she was ready to walk it. A commotion broke her focus as Heather's phone buzzed loudly on the counter. Heather glanced at the screen, her smug expression faltering slightly. She answered the call with a bright, practiced tone. "This is Heather, Skyline Air Priority Services," she chirped. Her face changed almost instantly as the voice on the other end spoke, eyes widening, mouth tightening. She turned her back to the lounge, lowering her voice but not enough to hide the tension in her words. Yes, sir. I understand," she stammered, her confident demeanor slipping. "But I didn't realize. Her voice trailed off, and she cast a furtive glance toward Jasmine, who sat watching the scene unfold with calm detachment. The other staff members began to notice the shift. Heather's body language was no longer the embodiment of self-assured authority. Instead, she looked cornered, her shoulders hunched as though she were bracing for impact. One of the junior staff members approached her, whispering something Jasmine couldn't catch. Heather shook her head sharply, her movements jerky and panicked. Heather's phone call ended abruptly, and she turned back to the counter, her face pale. She whispered something to the junior staff, who darted off toward the back office. The other employees exchanged nervous glances, the air in the lounge growing heavy with unease. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't need to. She was content to let them twist in the growing silence, each moment dragging out like the long shadows of an approaching storm. Finally, Heather hesitated before walking toward Jasmine's table. Her once confident stride was now tentative, and her voice, though attempting to remain professional, trembled at the edges. "Miss Carter," she began, her tone markedly different. I'd like to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier." Jasmine tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice as smooth as glass. "Is that what you're calling it?" Heather flinched slightly, her hands clasping nervously in front of her. "I assure you, we meant no disrespect. Jasmine held up a hand, cutting her off. "You meant no disrespect, yet you openly mocked me. You insinuated I didn't belong here. Tell me, Heather, would you have done the same to anyone else who walked in with my credentials?" Heather's mouth opened, but no words came out. Jasmine let the silence stretch, each second more suffocating than the last. "You'll understand," Jasmine said finally, her tone cool. "If I don't accept your apology. Actions have consequences, Heather. You'll see that soon enough." Heather's face drained of color, and she retreated without another word. The lounge was quiet again, but the tension was palpable. Jasmine picked up her phone and dialed Anderson. "Pull the trigger," she said simply. Anderson's response was swift and resolute. "Consider it done." The storm was about to break. The lounge seemed to hold its breath, the once busy chatter reduced to scattered whispers and the occasional clink of glass. Jasmine remained seated, her posture regal and her expression unyielding, even as the atmosphere around her shifted. She could feel the weight of their discomfort pressing against her like a palpable force. Heather hovered near the counter, her phone clenched tightly in her hand. Her earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a nervous energy that bordered on panic. Every few moments she glanced toward Jasmine, as if waiting for some cue to undo the unraveling chain of events. Jasmine offered none. Instead, she let her presence loom, silent and unassailable. The glass doors to the lounge hissed open, and a tall, sharply dressed man entered, his movements brisk and purposeful. His tailored suit and silver tie marked him as someone of importance, and the tension in the room ratcheted up several notches as heads turned to follow him. It was Edward Langston, Skyline Air's regional director, a man known for his no-nonsense demeanor and his unflinching approach to discipline. Heather's eyes widened as she caught sight of him. Her lips moved silently as though forming a prayer, but no sound escaped. Edward scanned the room briefly before his eyes landed on Jasmine. His expression softened ever so slightly, though the steel in his posture remained. He approached her table with measured steps. "Miss Carter," he greeted, his voice smooth but tinged with unease. "I'm Edward Langston. I believe we need to speak." Jasmine offered a polite but distant smile. "Indeed, Mr. Langston. Please, have a seat." She gestured to the chair across from her, and he obeyed without hesitation, his movements careful, as though navigating a minefield. Edward folded his hands on the table, his posture deferential. "First, let me extend my deepest apologies for the treatment you've received here today. It is unacceptable, and I assure you, it does not reflect the values of Skyline Air." Jasmine raised a brow, her expression unreadable. "And yet, it happened," she replied evenly. Not just once, but repeatedly. This wasn't an isolated incident, Mr. Langston. It was a culture, one your staff seemed quite comfortable perpetuating. Edward's jaw tightened, though his expression remained professional. You're absolutely right, Miss Carter, and I take full responsibility for that culture. Steps will be taken immediately to rectify this. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. Steps? She echoed. Mr. Langston, I'm not here for vague promises or half measures. Do you have any idea what was at stake in this situation? He hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the staff who were now frozen in place, their earlier bravado replaced with fear. Heather stood stiffly behind the counter, her hands trembling as she attempted to busy herself with meaningless tasks. I do, Edward said finally, his voice quieter but no less firm. Your account is one of our largest and most vital. Losing your partnership would what? Jasmine interrupted, her tone sharp but measured. Be inconvenient, costly, embarrassing. She sat back in her chair, folding her arms. What about the humiliation I endured? The assumptions, the blatant disrespect? Do you know how many times I've had to prove myself, simply because I walk into rooms like this with the wrong skin color? Edward flinched, but he didn't look away. Miss Carter, I can't undo what's been done, but I can assure you that those responsible will be held accountable. Skyline Air will not tolerate this behavior going forward. Jasmine studied him for a long moment, the silence between them heavy and charged. Then she nodded once, a small but significant gesture. Good, she said, her voice cool. Because I've already canceled my contract. Edward's composure faltered for the briefest moment, his eyes widening before he quickly masked his shock. Miss Carter, he began, leaning forward slightly. Please reconsider, There's nothing to reconsider, Jasmine interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. I've given Skyline Air every opportunity to prove its worth, and time again it has failed. My decision is final. The weight of her words settled over Edward like a physical blow. He leaned back in his chair, his shoulders sagging slightly. I understand, he said quietly. But please know that we will do everything in our power to earn back your trust. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. Instead, she picked up her phone and tapped the screen, her movements deliberate. She spoke without looking at him. I hope you do, Mr. Langston. For the sake of your other customers, if nothing else. As Edward rose to leave, he turned toward the staff. His gaze swept over them, cold and unyielding, before settling on Heather. She froze under his scrutiny, her face pale. Heather, he said, his voice like ice. A word. Now. Heather followed him out of the lounge, her steps faltering. The rest of the staff exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier camaraderie fractured under the weight of their collective guilt. Jasmine watched them for a moment, her expression neutral. Then she rose from her seat, collected her briefcase and walked toward the exit. Her steps were unhurried, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The glass doors hissed open as she stepped through, and for a moment the lounge was silent once more. But the storm she had left behind was far from over. The silence in the lounge grew heavier in Jasmine's absence. The soft clinking of glasses, the murmur of distant conversations, all of it felt muted, like the calm before an inevitable explosion. Staff members shuffled nervously behind the counter, stealing glances at the door through which Heather and Edward had disappeared moments earlier. The air was thick with anticipation, and no one dared speak. Heather sat stiffly in the small back office, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. Edward Langston loomed above her, his presence filling the room. The fluorescent lighting cast sharp shadows across his face, emphasizing the tight set of his jaw and the glint of fury in his eyes. Do you have any idea what you've done? Edward's voice was low, but it carried the weight of a storm. He leaned on the edge of the desk, his knuckles whitening as they pressed into the wood. Heather swallowed hard, her confidence from earlier now completely shattered. Sir, I didn't. You didn't what? Edward snapped, cutting her off. Didn't think, didn't care, or didn't realize that the woman you just humiliated controls one of the most significant partnerships this airline has ever had. Heather's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She searched for words, but none came. The realization of the magnitude of her actions was finally sinking in. "This isn't just about losing a contract," Edward continued, his voice growing colder. "This is about the reputation of this airline. Do you know how quickly news of something like this can spread? Do you understand the damage this could cause?" Heather's hands trembled in her lap. "I didn't mean to offend her," she said weakly. It was a misunderstanding." Edward straightened, his eyes narrowing. "A misunderstanding? You think mocking a paying customer, questioning their legitimacy, and openly laughing at them is a misunderstanding? No, Heather, this was prejudice. Plain and simple." Heather flinched at the word. Her carefully constructed defenses crumbled under the weight of his accusations. "I didn't mean for it to come across that way," she murmured, tears pooling in her eyes. Edward's gaze remained unyielding. "Intent doesn't matter. Impact does. And the impact of your actions has just cost this airline millions." While Heather faced Edward's wrath behind closed doors, the remaining staff were left to stew in the lounge. The junior employees exchanged nervous whispers, their earlier camaraderie dissolving into a storm of blame and fear. "Do you think she'll lose her job?" one of them muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "She has to," another replied. "Did you see the look on Langston's face? He's furious." "What about us?" a young woman asked, her voice shaking. "We didn't stop her. Does that make us just as guilty?" The question hung in the air unanswered. They all knew the truth, even if no one wanted to say it aloud. Unbeknownst to the staff, Jasmine had not left the airport entirely. Instead, she had relocated to a quieter area, where she watched the unfolding chaos from a distance. She sat by a large window overlooking the runway, her reflection staring back at her against the backdrop of taxiing planes. Her phone buzzed softly and she glanced at the screen. A text from Anderson. "The termination process is underway. I've secured a meeting with our new partner tomorrow." Jasmine allowed herself a small smile. The new partner was an airline known for its progressive policies and customer-first approach, an airline she was confident would uphold the standards Skyline had failed to meet. But her satisfaction was not without its bitterness. The sting of Heather's words and the laughter of the staff still lingered. It wasn't just about the contract or the money. It was about the principle, the countless times she and others like her had been dismissed, belittled, or underestimated. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was a victory, but it was one hard-fought and costly, and it was one she would not let go to waste. Within hours, the repercussions began to ripple outward. News of the incident had reached social media, despite Jasmine's intention to keep the matter private. A passenger in the lounge had recorded a snippet of the staff's mocking remarks and uploaded it with the caption, "Priority Lounge or Priority Prejudice. Watch how Skyline treats its customers." The video spread quickly, drawing outrage from viewers across the globe. Skyline's public relations team scrambled to contain the damage, issuing a carefully worded apology that did little to quell the storm. By the time Edward re-entered the lounge, his face was set in stone. He gestured for the remaining staff to gather near the counter, his voice sharp and commanding. "I want every one of you to listen very carefully," he began, his tone brooking no argument. "What happened here today was unacceptable. There is no room for this kind of behavior in our company, and I will not tolerate it." The staff exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence completely eroded. Heather trailed behind him, her face pale and her shoulders slumped. "Effective immediately," Edward continued, "Heather is no longer employed by Skyline Air. She has been terminated for gross misconduct." Heather let out a small, choked sound, but Edward didn't so much as glance at her. He turned his attention back to the group. "As for the rest of you," he said, his voice lowering dangerously, "consider this your only warning. If I hear so much as a whisper of behavior like this again, you'll be joining her." The staff nodded mutely, their faces etched with fear and shame. From her vantage point, Jasmine watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. She gathered her things and made her way toward the exit, her steps slow and deliberate. As she passed the lounge, she caught Edward's eye through the glass doors. He hesitated for a moment, then gave her a small, respectful nod. Jasmine didn't stop. She didn't need to. Her point had been made, her justice delivered. As she stepped into the cool evening air outside the airport, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The storm was over, and she had weathered it with her dignity intact. But for Skyline Air, the fallout was only just beginning. The car ride from the airport was silent except for the soft hum of the engine. Jasmine sat in the back seat of the sleek black sedan, her head resting lightly against the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Her driver, a stoic older man named Samuel, had worked for her for years and knew when to offer a word and when to let her be. Tonight, silence was her comfort. She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the cool glass. The evening had taken a toll on her, a reminder of battles fought long ago and the scars they left behind. The words, the stares, the laughter, they clung to her like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Yet, there was no room for self-pity. Jasmine Carter had built her life on resilience, turning moments like these into the foundation of her success. But tonight, the weight felt heavier than usual. Her phone buzzed in her lap, pulling her from her thoughts. She hesitated before glancing at the screen. Anderson Quinn again. "Good evening, Anderson," she answered, her tone neutral. "Jasmine," he began, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "I just got word that the video's gone viral. It's everywhere. News outlets, social media, even a few international networks. People are furious with Skyline." Jasmine closed her eyes briefly. She had expected fallout, but not at this magnitude, not so quickly. "Let them handle it," she said softly. "It's their mess to clean up." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're sure you don't want to make a statement? People are calling you a hero, Jasmine. They're waiting to hear from you." She opened her eyes, staring out at the cityscape beyond the window. "I didn't do this to be a hero, Anderson. I did it because it was right. That's enough." Anderson sighed, but there was no disagreement in his voice. "Understood. The new partner's ready for tomorrow. They're eager to finalize things." Jasmine smiled faintly. "Good. Let's make sure we're not putting ourselves in another situation like this one." "We won't," he assured her. "Rest well, Jasmine. You've earned it." She ended the call and set the phone aside, her gaze drifting back to the lights. As the car approached her townhouse, Jasmine's thoughts slipped into the past, unbidden and vivid. She remembered her first experience with prejudice. She had been 10, standing in line at a toy store with her mother. A man behind them had grumbled something about their kind always holding up the line. Her mother had stiffened but said nothing, her fingers tightening around Jasmine's shoulder as they stepped forward. Later, in the car, Jasmine had asked why the man was angry. Her mother had looked at her with weary eyes and simply said, "Sometimes people see the color of your skin before they see you, but that doesn't mean you let them define who you are." That lesson had shaped Jasmine's life, becoming both a burden and a source of strength. Tonight, it echoed in her mind, the weight of her mother's words grounding her. The following morning, the fallout from the incident had grown exponentially. Jasmine sat in her sunlit kitchen, sipping her coffee and scrolling through the endless stream of articles, tweets, and videos. Airline scandal, priority lounge prejudice sparks outrage. Black businesswoman stands up to discrimination, a viral moment of justice. Skyline Air faces backlash after racist incident in lounge. Her name was trending across platforms, accompanied by hashtags like #JusticeForJasmine and #SkylineScandal. The footage from the lounge had been dissected and analyzed, with viewers condemning not only Heather, but the airline's entire culture. A knock at the door interrupted her scrolling. She set her phone down and crossed the room, opening the door to reveal Samuel, holding a crisp envelope. "This was just delivered, ma'am," he said, handing it to her. Jasmine took the envelope, her brow furrowing at the embossed Skyline logo on the corner. She thanked Samuel and closed the door, walking back to the kitchen. She opened the envelope carefully, pulling out a single sheet of heavy paper. It was a letter from Skyline's CEO. Dear Miss Carter, on behalf of Skyline Air, I want to extend my sincerest apologies for the unacceptable treatment you endured in our lounge. I am deeply ashamed that our staff acted in a manner so antithetical to our values of respect, inclusion, and excellence. The individuals responsible have been terminated, and we are implementing mandatory training across all levels of our organization to ensure this never happens again. Furthermore, we would like to offer you lifetime priority membership as a gesture of our regret. Please know that your experience has become a catalyst for meaningful change within our company. If there is anything further we can do to make amends, do not hesitate to reach out. With deepest apologies, Elliot Greer, CEO, Skyline Air. Jasmine stared at the letter, her emotions a complex tangle of vindication, frustration, and exhaustion. A lifetime membership? Was that supposed to erase the sting of Heather's words, the laughter that had echoed through the lounge? She folded the letter neatly and placed it on the counter. Actions spoke louder than words, and she had already set her own course of action in motion. Later that afternoon, Jasmine sat in a sleek conference room with representatives from her new airline partner. The mood was light but professional, the air filled with optimism. "We're thrilled to have you on board, Miss Carter," the CEO said, extending a hand. "Your values align perfectly with ours, and we're committed to ensuring every passenger is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve." Jasmine shook his hand, her smile genuine. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to a partnership built on integrity and mutual respect." As the meeting concluded, Jasmine felt a sense of closure settle over her. The wounds from the previous day had not fully healed, but they had given way to something stronger, a renewed determination to fight for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or belittled. Justice was not a single moment, it was a process, and Jasmine Carter was ready to see it through. The evening sun cast a golden hue over the city as Jasmine walked through her townhouse, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floors. The house, though filled with modern elegance, felt unusually quiet. She paused by the large window overlooking the city skyline, her reflection blending with the fading sunlight. In her hand, she held the letter from Skyline Air's CEO, its words lingering in her mind. The apology had been formal, contrite even, but it felt hollow. A lifetime membership and promises of corporate change could not erase the deeper wounds inflicted by that night, wounds that weren't just hers but echoed the experiences of countless others. She placed the letter on the sleek black coffee table and sat down, her thoughts racing. Was it enough to let this go? To move forward with her new partner and leave Skyline to deal with the fallout? The answer came almost immediately. No. Jasmine Carter didn't just walk away from battles, she finished them. Jasmine retrieved her laptop from the side table and opened it, the glow of the screen illuminating her face. She began typing with purpose, her fingers moving deftly across the keyboard. If Skyline Air was truly committed to change, it would take more than a single letter and a few firings. She delved into the company's history, scrolling through employee reviews, customer complaints, and past controversies. What she found wasn't surprising, but still infuriated her. A pattern of discrimination complaints buried beneath polished PR campaigns and carefully worded settlements. A former employee's testimonial caught her eye. Skyline talks a big game about diversity, but behind the scenes, it's a different story. I witnessed firsthand how certain customers and employees were treated differently based on their background. It's a toxic culture they refuse to address. Jasmine's jaw tightened as she read further. The stories were eerily similar to her own experience. Customers humiliated, employees marginalized, all under the guise of procedures and protocols. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a systemic issue. The following morning, Jasmine placed a call to Anderson. His voice came through the line, crisp and alert as always. "Good morning, Jasmine. How's everything on your end?" "Busy," she replied, her tone calm but resolute. "I need your help with something." "Of course. What's on your mind?" "I've been digging into Skyline Air's history," she said, leaning back in her chair. "What happened to me wasn't an isolated case. It's part of a pattern, a culture that's been allowed to thrive unchecked." Anderson let out a low whistle. "I figured as much. What do you want to do about it?" Jasmine's gaze drifted to the skyline outside her window, her eyes narrowing slightly. "We're going to expose it, publicly. This isn't just about my experience. It's about every person they've wronged, every voice they've silenced. It's time Skyline answers for their actions." Anderson was silent for a moment, then said, "You're not just talking about a press release, are you?" "No," Jasmine said firmly. "I want a full investigation. We'll work with legal teams, journalists, and advocates. If Skyline thinks they can sweep this under the rug, they're about to learn differently." Over the next few weeks, Jasmine assembled a team of professionals who shared her vision. Lawyers specializing in civil rights cases, investigative journalists eager to uncover the truth, and grassroots advocates who had long fought against systemic injustice. Meetings were held late into the night, the team poring over documents, interviewing former employees, and compiling evidence. Jasmine's townhouse became a temporary headquarters, its normally pristine surfaces covered in folders, laptops, and cups of long-forgotten coffee. Through it all, Jasmine remained a steady force, her determination inspiring those around her. One evening, a young journalist named Claire approached her, holding a stack of papers. "Miss Carter, we've found something you should see." Jasmine took the papers and scanned them, her eyes narrowing as the pieces fell into place. Claire continued, her voice tinged with urgency. "It's worse than we thought. There's evidence that Skyline suppressed multiple discrimination claims, forcing employees and customers into settlements with non-disclosure agreements." Jasmine set the papers down, her expression unreadable. "How many?" "Dozens," Claire replied. "Maybe more." Jasmine exhaled slowly, the weight of the discovery settling over her. "Then we've got what we need. Let's make it count." The exposé broke on a quiet Wednesday morning. Major news outlets published the findings simultaneously, their headlines bold and unflinching. Skyline Air's hidden scandals, a culture of discrimination exposed. Whistleblowers speak out, decades of racism and inequality at Skyline Air. Jasmine Carter's fight for justice spurs national conversation. The articles were detailed and damning, filled with testimonials from employees and customers who had long been silenced. Jasmine's own story served as the catalyst, her name and image plastered across television screens and online platforms. Skyline's CEO, Elliot Greer, was forced to address the media in an emergency press conference. His polished demeanor cracked under the weight of pointed questions, his apologies sounding increasingly hollow. "We are deeply sorry for the pain caused," he stammered. "We are committed to making meaningful changes." A reporter interrupted, holding up a printed copy of the exposé. "Mr. Greer, why didn't Skyline address these issues when they were first reported? Why did it take a public scandal to force your hand?" Greer's response was lost in a cacophony of camera shutters and murmurs. As Jasmine watched the coverage from her office, a quiet sense of satisfaction settled over her. The fight was far from over, but this was a start, a turning point not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed or dehumanized. Her phone buzzed, a text from Anderson. "You did it, Jasmine. This is bigger than anyone imagined." She smiled faintly, her fingers hovering over the screen before she typed her reply. "We did it, and it's just the beginning." Jasmine Carter didn't just endure storms, she turned them into movements. And this time, the world was watching. The days following the exposé were a whirlwind of media attention, legal inquiries, and public outcry. Skyline Air's headquarters became a focal point for protests, with demonstrators holding signs that read, "Accountability now," and "Justice for all." News vans lined the streets, their cameras trained on the entrance as executives shuffled in and out under a storm of flashbulbs and shouted questions. Jasmine watched it all unfold from a distance, her townhouse a sanctuary from the chaos she had helped unleash. The fight was no longer hers alone. It had become a movement. But even in victory, Jasmine couldn't shake the lingering weight of the battle. As she stood in her living room, gazing out at the city below, the quiet felt more oppressive than comforting. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, a reminder of the toll this had taken. She thought of the faces she had met during the investigation, employees who had risked everything to speak out, customers who had finally found the courage to share their stories. Each one carried their own scars, their own burdens. Jasmine had become their voice, but the responsibility was heavy. The doorbell's chime broke the silence, its tone sharp against the quiet. Jasmine turned, her heels clicking softly as she approached the door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and Samuel had already left for the evening. Opening the door, she found a familiar figure standing on her doorstep. It was Claire, the young journalist who had unearthed the damning documents. Her auburn hair was slightly disheveled, and her hands clutched a manila folder. "Claire," Jasmine said, her surprise evident. "What brings you here?" "I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced," Claire began, her voice tinged with urgency. "But there's something you need to see." Jasmine stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Claire moved quickly, her nervous energy palpable as she placed the folder on the coffee table. "I thought we'd uncovered everything," Claire continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "But I was wrong. There's more." Jasmine opened the folder carefully, her eyes scanning the documents inside. They were internal memos, emails between executives and financial records. One email in particular caught her attention. "We need to handle this quietly. Any public acknowledgement could damage the brand irreparably. Offer settlements where necessary, but ensure NDAs are signed." The date on the email was recent, just weeks before the exposé. Jasmine's eyes narrowed as she flipped through more pages, uncovering a clear pattern of deliberate cover-ups. "This changes everything," Jasmine said quietly, her voice like steel. Skyline didn't just ignore the problem, they actively worked to silence it. Claire nodded, her expression grim. "It gets worse. There's evidence that some of the settlements involved intimidation. Employees were threatened with termination if they didn't comply." Jasmine leaned back, the weight of the discovery settling over her. "We can't let this stand," she said firmly. "The public needs to know the full extent of what's happened." The following morning, Jasmine sat in her office, the folder spread out before her. She was on the phone with Anderson, her voice calm but resolute. "This isn't just about exposing Skyline anymore," she said. "It's about making sure the people they hurt get justice. Real justice." Anderson sighed on the other end of the line. "You realize what you're taking on, right? This could escalate into a legal war. Skyline won't go down without a fight." "I'm not afraid of a fight," Jasmine replied. "I never have been. But this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been silenced, intimidated, and dismissed. If we don't see this through, who will?" Anderson was silent for a moment before he said, "I'll back you, Jasmine, whatever you need." As the days turned into weeks, the fight became even more intense. Jasmine found herself working late into the night, meeting with lawyers, strategists, and advocates. Each day brought new challenges, but also new victories. Yet the strain was undeniable. One evening, as she sat alone in her living room, the exhaustion caught up with her. She rested her head in her hands, the weight of it all pressing down like a physical force. Her phone buzzed on the table and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from her mother's old friend, a woman who had been like an aunt to her growing up. "Proud of you, Jasmine. Your mother would be too. Stay strong." Jasmine felt a lump rise in her throat. Her mother's words from years ago echoed in her mind. Never let them define who you are. She sat up straighter, her resolve hardening. The fight wasn't over, but she would see it through. The next phase of the battle unfolded in courtrooms and boardrooms, with Jasmine leading the charge. The new evidence Claire had uncovered became a turning point, forcing Skyline to confront not just public scrutiny, but also legal consequences. Employees who had been silenced came forward in droves, their voices finally heard. Customers shared their stories, each one adding to the growing tide of accountability. Through it all, Jasmine remained a steady presence, a symbol of resilience and justice. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Months later, as the dust began to settle, Jasmine found herself standing before a crowd at a press conference. The settlement with Skyline had been finalized, including reparations for those who had been wronged and sweeping reforms within the company. Jasmine spoke with quiet power, her words carrying the weight of the journey she had taken. "This isn't just about one company or one incident," she said. "It's about the choices we make every day to stand up for what's right, to demand better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone." The crowd erupted into applause, but Jasmine's expression remained thoughtful. This was a victory, but it was only the beginning of the change she hoped to see in the world. As she stepped away from the podium, she felt a sense of peace for the first time in months. The fight had been long and grueling, but it had been worth it. Jasmine Carter had turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change, and she wasn't done yet. The weeks after the settlement with Skyline Air passed with a strange stillness. The protests had faded, and the media's focus had shifted to other scandals, but the ripples of Jasmine's actions continued to spread. The airline remained in the spotlight, its restructuring efforts scrutinized by both the public and its shareholders. Skyline's promises of change were plastered across press releases, but Jasmine knew better than to take them at face value. Change, she understood, wasn't a moment, it was a process, and it required constant vigilance. For Jasmine, life had returned to its steady rhythm, or at least as steady as it could be after the storm she had weathered. She found herself buried in work for her logistics firm, her days filled with meetings, strategic planning, and the occasional glance at the ongoing developments within Skyline. Yet, as much as she tried to move forward, a nagging feeling remained. The battle she had fought had been necessary and impactful, but it was only a symptom of a much larger problem. The injustice she had faced wasn't unique to Skyline. It was embedded in systems far beyond one corporation. One crisp autumn morning, Jasmine found herself seated in a towering glass-walled office overlooking the city. Across from her was a group of executives from various industries, leaders of corporations, heads of nonprofits, and prominent advocates for social justice. They had asked for this meeting, and now she was here, curious to hear what they had to say. "Miss Carter," began an older man with salt and pepper hair, his tone respectful. "Your actions against Skyline have done more than hold a company accountable. They've inspired a movement. You've given people the courage to speak up and demand better." Jasmine listened quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "But inspiration isn't enough," the man continued. "We need action, real systemic change, and we believe you're the right person to lead the charge." He slid a folder across the table. Jasmine opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. Inside were detailed plans for an initiative they had named the Equity Alliance, a coalition designed to tackle systemic discrimination across industries. The initiative would create training programs, audit corporate policies, and provide resources to empower marginalized voices. "It's ambitious," Jasmine said, leaning back in her chair. The man nodded. "It is. But if we want to create lasting change, we need to be bold." Jasmine closed the folder and met his gaze. "I'll do it," she said firmly, "but only if we're fully committed. This can't be a token effort. If I'm going to put my name behind this, it needs to be real, measurable, impactful, and transformative." The room erupted into nods and agreements. Jasmine felt a flicker of excitement, a sense that this was the next step she had been searching for. Over the following months, Jasmine threw herself into the work of building the Equity Alliance. It was a monumental task, but she thrived under the pressure. She surrounded herself with a team of experts, lawyers specializing in civil rights, corporate consultants with a passion for reform, and grassroots advocates who brought first-hand experience to the table. The coalition began by focusing on industries where inequity was most deeply entrenched: hospitality, finance, and retail. They conducted audits, uncovered biases in hiring practices, and worked with leadership teams to rewrite policies from the ground up. Jasmine became the face of the movement, her story a rallying cry for change. She spoke at conferences, participated in panel discussions, and met with CEOs who were ready to take accountability, and those who weren't. "There's no room for half measures," she told a packed audience at a leadership summit. "Change requires discomfort. It requires confronting hard truths and making difficult decisions. But the alternative is perpetuating harm, and that's not an option." Her words were met with a standing ovation. Not everyone welcomed Jasmine's efforts. Some companies resisted change, unwilling to disrupt their status quo. Others made hollow promises, hoping to ride out the storm without taking real action. Jasmine faced criticism from detractors who accused her of being too radical, too uncompromising. Late one night, after a grueling day of meetings and calls, Jasmine sat alone in her office, staring at the city lights outside her window. She was exhausted, the weight of the work pressing down on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed with a message from Claire, the young journalist who had helped uncover Skyline's scandals. "Don't let them wear you down," the text read. "What you're doing matters. People are watching and they're learning from you." Jasmine smiled faintly. The message was a reminder of why she had started this journey: to create a world where people like Claire, like herself, didn't have to fight so hard just to be seen and heard. Months later, Jasmine stood at the opening of the Equity Alliance's first physical headquarters, a sleek building in the heart of the city. The space had been designed to foster collaboration and innovation, with open workspaces, conference rooms, and a resource center for marginalized employees seeking support. As she cut the ribbon, surrounded by her team and supporters, Jasmine felt a surge of pride. This wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together to demand better. That evening, Jasmine returned to her townhouse, the glow of the day still warming her heart. She stepped onto her balcony with a glass of wine, gazing out at the city. Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulatory notes, updates from her team, invitations to upcoming events. She set it aside, choosing instead to savor the moment. Her mind drifted to her mother, whose lessons had shaped her resilience. Jasmine could almost hear her voice. "Never let them define who you are. Define yourself." As the stars began to dot the night sky, Jasmine allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She knew the fight for equity was far from over, but she also knew she had built something lasting, something that would continue to grow and thrive long after she was gone. Years later, the Equity Alliance had become a global force, with chapters in cities around the world. Jasmine's name was synonymous with resilience, justice, and change. At a gala celebrating the Alliance's 10th anniversary, Jasmine stood before an audience of thousands. Her speech was simple but powerful. "This movement isn't about me," she said. "It's about all of us, about choosing to stand up when it's easier to stay silent, about choosing courage over complacency. We've made progress, but the work isn't done. And it never will be. Not until every person in every corner of the world is treated with dignity and respect." The crowd erupted into applause, but Jasmine remained thoughtful. The applause wasn't for her. It was for the movement, for the countless voices that had joined hers in demanding change. As she left the stage, she felt a sense of fulfillment she had rarely allowed herself to feel. The battle was ongoing, but she had built something that would endure. Jasmine Carter had turned a moment of injustice into a lifetime of purpose, and as she walked into the next chapter of her life, she knew the horizon was brighter than ever. And so, Jasmine Carter turned a moment of injustice into a movement for change, proving that resilience and courage can dismantle even the deepest-rooted prejudices. Her story is a powerful reminder that standing up for what's right can inspire change far beyond our imagination. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join us for more stories that uncover truths, celebrate triumphs, and spark conversations that matter. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching.